Hey, good morning everybody. Bob here. Trying to find any spare second that I can to do a review. It's been a minute, and I really like doing these, and I just haven't had a lot of time lately. So I thought what I would do is this morning on my way to work, I would talk about a movie I saw last night, Rambo Last Blood, Rambo 5. So, of course, if you haven't seen the Rambo movies, Sly Stallone plays John Rambo, former war veteran. Every movie is a little bit different plot-wise, of course. Rambo 4, which came out about 10 years ago, is still to this day probably the most violent Hollywood movie that I have ever seen. It is just brutal and over the top, and just war violence wise, people getting torn in half, machine guns and stuff. It is just brutal. In fact, it's actually one of the only movies I can think of with the director's cut, which was released later on, DVD and Blu-ray and stuff, is actually toned down from the theatrical version. Stallone was like, man, I think I actually went a little too far with this, and toned it back just a touch. So the director's cut of Rambo 4, otherwise known as John Rambo, is actually not quite as violent as the theatrical version, in case you didn't know that. Rambo 5 takes place 10 years after Part 4, where John has finally gotten home. He's running a ranch, his family's ranch in Arizona, and we find that for the last 10 years he's been taking care of his sister's daughter, his niece Gabriella. So she's living on the farm with him, on the ranch with him and everything. And the plot of this movie is that Gabriella decides she wants to meet her father, who she has not seen since 10 years earlier. So she was probably supposed to be like 7 or 8 and hasn't seen him, because she's a recently graduated high school senior headed off to college soon. So so of course Stallone is like, no, you definitely shouldn't do that. Her father lives in Mexico. He's like, you don't want to go to Mexico. It's not a good idea. Of course she does it anyway. She finds out her father is a total asshole, and that's kind of the beginning and end of that story. But while she's in Mexico, she's kidnapped by sex traffickers and like a drug cartel. So now Stallone has to go to Mexico, find her, and kick some ass. If the plot sounds a little bit to you like Taken with Liam Neeson, it is. It's very similar to that kind of a movie. In fact, if I had to take 3 movies that this movie is very much like, I would say it's very much like Taken. In my mind, it's very much like Logan, and not so much plot or anything, not movie-wise, but to me, it's basically Stallone's Old Man Logan is what I really feel like it is. Rambo's Old Man Logan, essentially. And then the third movie I'd say it's a lot alike is Home Alone. If you've seen the trailer for this movie, you'll see they show him making all these booby traps and stuff because the cartel's coming to get him. So he's rigging up his entire ranch with all these booby traps. So the first 2/3 of the movie plays out exactly kind of as you would anticipate. He goes to Mexico to look for her. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's a weak story. It's certainly, it's not, it's pretty generic, to be honest. The fighting the cartel. It is what it is. I've been looking forward to this movie for quite a while. I thought, hey, that's a pretty, it's a pretty decent follow up from any of the other ones. It's a different, kind of a different direction. It's not a war movie, but I will say that it's over the top, extremely violent. Not in the same way as Rambo 4. And I've seen a lot of people say that they think it's just as violent as Part 4. I would definitely not say that. I think it's a different kind of violence. Like I said, Part 4 is super war violence and, heavy machine guns, tearing people in half, and just kind of a really different kind of a situation. This is almost gory in a horror movie sense, like the Saw films, where these booby traps are just destroying people and shotguns to the face, blowing heads off completely. It's that kind of, it's more like intimate violence, perhaps, one-on-one violence. The when Stallone's looking for information in Mexico, he, with his bare hands, rips a guy's, like, what is this, the clavicle, the shoulder, rips this bone out and snaps it off with his bare hands, and it's brutal. It's horror movie brutal, which was cool. I mean, I kind of went into this movie hoping that it was going to be, a violent action movie. That's what I was anticipating. That's what I was expecting from a Rambo movie, and I was not let down at all by that aspect. I do felt that the movie was a little bit rushed. It in the U.S. and Canada, the movie's 89 minutes. It's an hour. It's basically an hour and a half. I guess in the UK and in some other countries, it's about 10 or 12 minutes longer. But to my understanding, the scene is at the beginning, and it's more of a flashback, and it kind of just expands on the Rambo, on his kind of emotional state a little bit. And they touch on that, and they touch on his PTSD in this. And I guess that just kind of expands on that a little bit. I don't know why they cut it for the US. Maybe there's probably a number of reasons. Maybe they just feel like, in the US, run times, people kind of veer towards shorter run times. I don't think that's the case anymore with movies like In Chapter 2 being almost 3 hours and doing, $1 billion. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, same thing. It's like 3 hours, and people are going to see those movies. So maybe it's not that. I really don't know. But at any rate, it did feel still a little bit rushed to me. It was a little bit shorter, and sometimes you see an hour and a half movie and you're like, man, that felt perfect. Sometimes you feel see an hour and a half movie and it's too long. This actually felt a little bit rushed, and I feel like they could have probably expanded it a little bit more. But it's still, it's not, it was anything bad. I don't, there wasn't anything where I'm like, boy, I wish that they had, really dragged out the story or anything. It was told in a very, kind of quick way, I guess, is really what it comes down to. I read a couple of reviews, not really of the movie. I actually read reviews of the movie before I went to see this last night. Because what's happening right now is that audiences are pretty well enjoying the movie. From what I've seen, from my not only just my social circle of people at movie friends of movies and stuff, but just even the cinema score on Rotten Tomatoes last I checked was in the mid 80s. So it's okay. Whereas the actual critic scores are very low. So I started looking. I was like, God, how could there's a disparity, and that's usually the case, but to be that much of a disparity seems kind of odd. So I was looking, and there was some reviews of reviews, and what it comes down to is that a lot of professional reviewers went to see this movie, and they feel like it's kind of a pro-Trump movie. This is the era that we live in. Rambo going to Mexico and fighting Mexicans, and I didn't really want to touch on this too much, but I will say that that's the stupidest thing ever. So I read those reviews. I went into this movie specifically looking to see if, we're going to have a big political lean one way or the other. No, not for 1 second is there even, there's no political lean in this movie at all. It's Stallone fighting a cartel, a Mexican cartel. The fact that people even complained about it, doesn't make any sense. He goes to Mexico, and his niece goes to Mexico because she's half Mexican. Her father is Mexican. He has moved back to Mexico. He has left the family. She wants to find him. That's why they're in Mexico. The ranch was always set in Arizona. So it really fits the story, and there's no narrative here that has anything to do with a political nature at all. There's just nothing. It doesn't go that route. It's just a kick-ass. It's a kicking-ass movie. So I don't know why that came up, but because it did, I went to the movie looking for it. I said, oh, let's see how far right this leans, and it's all gonna be anti-immigration. So it's just not a thing that's in this movie. It doesn't have anything to do with immigration. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. There are cartels in Mexico. There's cartels in every country, and then it's just a I hate to use the word a generic action movie, but you know, because it's not, it's a little generic, I guess, but it's just not. It was fun. It was a fun movie. It's a lose yourself kind of popcorn eating, brutal action movie. That's what it is, and that's probably what it was designed to be. I don't think it was supposed to be preachy in any way, and it's not. So to those reviewers, those professional critics who went in, I think, looking to want to hate it, you know, more power to you. The same thing kind of happened with the last Rambo, and then audiences ended up loving it. And I you know, for people who like this kind of movie, you really couldn't go wrong with Rambo 4, and I don't think you can go wrong with Rambo 5. You know, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. I went in with, you know, just kind of middle of the road expectations, thinking, you know, Stallone's 72 years old or whatever he is now, and, you know, well, how's this going to work out? Well, it works out fine. He kicks ass the whole time. He doesn't, you know, he doesn't look 72. He doesn't act 72. He's not old. He's not playing that kind of a guy. So, overall, anyway, it was an awesome movie. It was totally, it was tons of fun. If you are a Rambo fan, if you are an action fan, you could do a whole hell of a lot worse than checking out Rambo 5, Last Blood. I did see Sly Stallone has gone on record saying that if this movie does well enough, they've got ideas for a 6. Whether or not we'll ever get it, who knows, because he's also working on Expendables, a new Expendables movie. Expendables, what are we up to? 4 now. So, and you know, he's pretty, he's got a lot of stuff going on. So, but at any rate, definitely, if you're interested, if you enjoy the Rambo films, this would definitely be something you want to add in. If you're looking for a good, you know, kind of an end of summer popcorn munching film, I would definitely consider checking out Rambo Last Blood. Anyway, thanks for riding along with me to work this morning, and I hope that you will join me again soon. Thanks very much.